Montana Territory, July of 1873, the air was dry as bone and the sun beat down hard over the Miles City stockyards, where the scent of sweat and livestock mixed with something fouler desperation. Yates Granger stepped down off his buckskin gelding, boots hitting dirt with a quiet thud. Dust clung to the hem of his long coat, same as it clung to every part of this forsaken place. He had come to buy supplies, maybe a new bridle, possibly a few head of cattle if the price was right. He had not come to buy a woman, but there she was. Stood like she had forgotten how to stand, wrists bound with twine, dirt on her face like someone had tried to bury her in life. They had her up on a makeshift platform, half hidden behind the pens. A man in a vest too fine for this place barked out prices like he was selling mules. She's strong. Quiet too, no kin, no husband, good teeth. 18 years old, healthy, will work sunup to sundown, starting bid $40, Yates's jaw locked tight. What the hell is this? The older man next to him, a rancher he had seen once or twice, shrugged. Rail camps are always short on help. Some folks take advantage, say she owed money, say she ran off, who knows? Yates did not care about the story. He could read the truth in her eyes. She was terrified. Her name came out when the man shouted again. Name's Norah Tallen, from Wyoming Territory, far as we know. Anyone willing to offer more than 40, Yates stepped forward. 75, the auctioneer blinked. That's generous, going once. 80, came a voice from the crowd. A grubby man with a red beard and a sneer, Yates's voice cut through. 100. Sold. Norah did not move when they cut her free. She stared at the ground like she could disappear into it. You are free now, Yates said low as he stepped in front of her. You hear me? She looked up, slow and unsure. Her lip was split. She nodded once, barely. Yates helped her into the saddle of his horse, then walked them both back to where his wagon waited. He did not ask questions. Not yet. The girl had not rested in days, that much was clear. By the time they reached the edge of town, Norah had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Yates's homestead sat in a quiet valley 2 hours south of Miles City. One barn, one house, and a creek that had not dried up in 10 summers. He lived alone, had for years. He liked the quiet. But that evening, as he carried Norah over the threshold of his home, her too weak to walk, he knew the silence had never healed anything. He laid her down on the spare cot near the stove. She stirred but did not wake. Sunlight shifted across the wooden floor as he lit the lantern and sat beside her. When she opened her eyes again, it was deep into the night. You are not going to make me work for you, she asked, voice hoarse. Yates shook his head. No, she turned away, but he saw her jaw tremble. I do not want anything from you, Norah. You are safe here. You can rest. As long as you need. She did not speak again, but a tear slipped down the side of her face and into the pillow. Days passed. Norah stayed quiet, but she moved easier now. She helped around the house when she felt steady enough, peeling potatoes, folding laundry, sweeping the porch. Yates never asked her to, she just did it. She wore one of his old shirts, sleeves rolled up, and tied her hair back with a piece of twine. One morning she stood at the fence line watching the horses graze. Why did you do it? She asked. Yates looked up from the saddle he was oiling. By you, she nodded. He wiped his hands on a rag. Because no one else was going to help you, and I could not walk away from that. Her voice was soft. I thought maybe you would want something in return. I do not. His voice was firm. You owe me nothing. She turned her head away, blinking fast. That night he found her sitting outside in the dark, knees pulled to her chest. I was not always alone, she said when she noticed him behind her. My father died last winter. Cattle fever took him. We owed money. The man who sold me, he said I could work it off. I believed him. Yates sat beside her. You do not have to talk about it. I want to, she said, voice cracking. I do not want to keep carrying it alone. He said nothing, just reached out and laid his hand over hers. She did not pull away. Weeks passed. Norah laughed now. Once a day, maybe twice. She chopped vegetables like she had done it all her life. She asked about Yates's horses, and he showed her how to brush them, how to feed them sugar cubes from her palm. One afternoon, he found her sewing a patch on his shirt without being asked. You do not have to fix my things, he said. I know, she said, looking up at him with something new in her eyes. But I want to. He nodded, throat tight. That evening, they ate stew by the fire. Afterward, Norah stood in the doorway watching the sun dip behind the hills. "I never thought I would be warm again," she said. Yates came to stand beside her. "You are safe now, Norah. No one is ever going to lay a hand on you again." She turned toward him, slow. "You have been kind to me. More than anyone ever has." "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," she said, "not anyone. You." He looked at her then, really looked. The fear was still there, somewhere deep, but it was softer now. Beneath it, something else bloomed: quiet trust, hope. Norah stepped closer. "I do not want to be afraid anymore," she said. "Not of men, not of what comes next." "You do not have to be," he said, and she reached for his hand. Yates let her fingers twine with his, and neither of them spoke again that night. They just stood in the doorway, watching the last light fade, hand in hand. Norah rose early now, before the light crept over the ridge. She moved barefoot across the cool wooden floor, careful not to wake Yates, who slept in the other room with the door ajar. The stillness of morning suited her. It gave her space to breathe without watching eyes, to listen to the hush of the land, the soft rustle of breeze through cottonwood leaves, the trickle of water in the creek beyond the barn. She washed at the basin near the hearth, then pulled on one of the cotton dresses Yates had traded for in town last week. It hung loose on her, but it was clean and whole, and the color a dusky rose made her feel like someone who could belong somewhere again. Behind the house, she dug her hands into the earth of the small garden plot, working between rows of beans and onions. Her palms blistered easy at first, but she didn't mind that. It was different from the kind of hurting she'd known before. This kind came with purpose. Yates joined her later, his shadow stretching long beside her as he carried a bucket of water from the creek. "You planted straight," he said, glancing over the rows. "Better than I've ever managed." She wiped her brow with the back of her arm. "It helps to mark the lines first." "A stick and some twine." He crouched beside her, the brim of his hat low against the light. "You grow up farming." "Just a patch of land, enough to get by. My ma kept chickens. We sold eggs to the trading post near Cheyenne." He nodded, then reached to pull a weed that had crept in between the stalks. "You ever think of leaving here?" she asked, not looking at him. "I did once," he said after a pause. "Thought about heading south, maybe Arizona territory. But the land here's steady, and the quiet suits me." She looked at his hands, rough and darkened with sun. "You don't seem afraid of being alone." "I'm not," he said, "but I've known the kind of quiet that doesn't do a man any good. The kind that turns into something else if you let it." She understood that kind, had lived it too long. That evening, after supper, she sat on the porch with her knees pulled up, watching the swallows dip through the dusk. Yates came out carrying a tin box. He handed it to her wordlessly. Inside lay a few folded sheets of paper and a charcoal pencil. "I thought maybe you'd want to write to someone," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "If you had kin or someone waiting." She touched the paper, then closed the lid. "There's no one left," she said. "But thank you." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't press on her chest, the kind that let her be. After the sky had deepened to indigo, she turned toward him. "Why did you never marry?" He didn't answer right away. "Then I was engaged once, long time back. Before the war." She waited. Her name was Alma. She didn't want to wait for me to come back. I didn't blame her. Norah's voice was low. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did, but when I came home, I didn't miss her. I missed the idea of her, maybe. The way things used to be." She traced the edge of the tin box with her finger. "It's strange," she murmured. "How you can think something is yours forever and then it just isn't." He looked over at her, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I'm not trying to hold on to anything that doesn't want to stay," he said. "I'm not running anymore," she answered. The wind moved through the tall grass beyond the porch. A coyote howled somewhere far off, lonely and small. Norah leaned her head against the post, eyes half closed. Yates didn't move to touch her, but his presence beside her felt like something solid she could lean against if she needed. When the night grew cooler, she rose and stepped inside. At the threshold, she looked back. "You ever think about building another room?" "In case someone decided to stay," he met her eyes. "I'd build it with my own hands." She nodded once and disappeared into the house. Yates remained outside a little longer, his gaze on the stars, as if listening for something only he could hear. The first frost came early that year, whispering across the valley in the deep hours before dawn. Norah stood at the edge of the woodshed, arms wrapped around herself, watching the steam rise from the horses' backs as they shifted in the corral. The cold stung her cheeks, but it cleared her thoughts in a way the warm stove never could. She had begun to feel something close to steady, but it still startled her how quickly memory could rise with the cold. Yates came around the barn, a coil of rope over one shoulder and a coil of fatigue in his eyes. "You're up early," he said, voice rough from sleep. "I couldn't stay in," she replied, not looking away from the frost-laced fence posts. He didn't press her. Just stepped beside her and glanced toward the horses. "I've got to mend the south gate today. Elk rubbed through it last night. If they get in again, they'll strip the orchard bare," she nodded. "I'll help." He studied her a moment. "You sure?" "I want to," she said, lifting her chin. "I've never built a fence, but I'd like to know how." By mid-morning, they were knee-deep in brittle grass and splintered rails. Yates showed her how to set the posts firm, how to brace them against frost heave. Her hands grew red with the cold, but she didn't slow. "You ever think about what you'd do if you had land of your own?" he asked, handing her a mallet. "I used to," she said, pressing the rail into place. "Before everything turned sideways, I wanted a root cellar. A big one. With shelves so neat you'd know which jar was which by feel." He gave a quiet sound that could have been a laugh. "That's a fine kind of dream." "What about you?" she asked. "What would you change if you could?" He paused with the post hole digger in hand. "I'd build a windbreak on the north side. Plant cottonwoods, maybe dig deeper into the well, make it hold through July." She looked over at him, her hair tangled with wind. "You're still thinking like you're alone on this land." "I've been alone a long time, Norah. I'm here now." He didn't answer, but when she handed him the rope, his fingers brushed hers longer than they needed to. That evening, she baked cornbread with wild honey he'd traded for at the last supply run. They ate by lamplight, the windows fogged with cold. After the dishes were washed and dried, she didn't retreat to her cot. Instead, she lingered by the stove, her hands open over the heat. Yates leaned back in the chair, one boot resting over the other. "You don't have to stay up on my account." "I know," she said, gaze steady, "but I don't want to sleep apart from you anymore." He sat forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Are you sure?" "I've had enough of being afraid. I want to be where I feel safe. That's with you." He stood slowly, not touching her at first. Then he reached to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, careful and sure. "I'll move the cot into the loft tomorrow," he said. "You can have the bed." "I don't want the bed to myself," she replied, voice low. "I want to be beside you." He exhaled softly, like something in his chest had let go for the first time in years. "There's room," he said. "If you want it." She nodded, and he stepped back to give her space to choose. Later, as they lay beneath the quilts, neither spoke. The silence between them felt like something earned. Norah turned toward him in the dark, her hand resting over his. "I'm not just grateful, Yates. I want a life with you." He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was steady. "Then let's build one, together." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, sleep came easy. Norah stood at the back of the barn, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, her hands dusted with flour from feeding the hens earlier. She was splitting kindling with a hatchet Yates had reshaped for her palm, the handle shaved down narrow and smooth. Her strokes were measured and steady, the rhythm of them echoing soft against the beams. Yates leaned against the stall door, watching without speaking. He waited until she paused to collect the thinner pieces before stepping forward. "You ever think about keeping goats?" he asked, brushing hay from his shirt. She tapped the axe gently against her boot. "I've never thought much about goats." "They're stubborn things," he said, "but they give good milk and cheese if you've got the patience." She studied the woodpile. "We'd need a better fence. The one we built wouldn't hold 'em." "I was thinking we could string wire behind the cedar posts. I've got some in the shed if it hasn't rusted through." "I could help with that after supper," she said. Yates nodded, then reached for the sack of oats resting beside the stall. He poured a measure into a tin scoop and held it out to her. "You want to feed the mare today?" Norah took the scoop. "She's been following me along the fence line." "Think she's starting to like me?" "She's got good sense, then." The mare nuzzled into Nora's palm as she poured the feed, her coat warm and sleek from yesterday's brushing. Norah kept one hand steady against the animal's neck, her expression softening in a way Yates hadn't seen since the first rain broke over the valley last month. "You ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Before all this, before you came out here," he leaned back against the beam. "Sometimes. My brother had a smith shop back in Missouri. I used to help him when I was younger, grew up thinking I'd be the one to stay. What changed? I went away to fight. By the time I came back, the shop was ash. Flood took the whole town a year later. My brother headed east. I headed west." She didn't ask more. She just looked at him, quiet and searching. That night, while a wind scraped low across the roof, Norah sat on the floor beside the hearth, her knees drawn close. She was stitching a tear in one of the curtain panels, the needle moving neat and quick. Yates sat nearby, sharpening the blade of a drawknife with a whetstone, his motions slow. Norah looked up. "There's a bit of land near the creek I haven't walked yet, behind the pines. It's rocky," he said, "but there's serviceberry there in spring. Elk Trail crosses through. I'd like to see it come morning." He gave a short nod. "I'll go with you." Her gaze held his for a long moment. "You don't have to, I know." The next morning, frost clung to the grass, but the sky was clear. They walked through the field in silence, boots pressing soft into the thawing earth. Norah held her skirts above the damp, her eyes scanning the tree line until it broke into a slope of stone and scrub. They stopped where the ground opened into a narrow ravine, the creek threading below in slow curves. Norah crouched beside the water, trailing her fingers across its surface. This would be a good spot for a root cellar. Yates knelt beside her. "Ground's firm enough. We'd need to shore it with timber." She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "We could start come spring." He looked at her hands, red with cold but steady. "We could." They sat there a while, the sun rising warm across their shoulders. Norah pressed her palm flat to the earth. "I never planned to belong anywhere again." Yates reached over, his hand covering hers. "You do now." She didn't speak, but her fingers curled into his. They walked home slow, the wind at their backs, and neither of them looked behind. The thaw came slow and steady, turning the valley to mud and waking the creek into a low, constant murmur. Norah stood at the edge of the garden rows, where the snow had finally melted clean to earth, her boots sinking soft beneath her. She had a basket looped over her arm with the last of the winter onions, and a clutch of dried beans she'd saved in a tin all season. Yates came from the barn carrying a bundle of fence wire and a hammer tucked into his belt. His coat was patched at the shoulder, and there was sawdust in his hair. "You think it's too early to plant?" she asked, brushing soil from her fingers. "It's early," he said, "but I've seen years it worked out fine." She crouched and pressed a fingertip into the soil, sniffed the wind. "Feels like it'll hold this time." He didn't argue. He watched her a moment, then bent to help stake the first row. Later, when the sun was high and the chickens had wandered to the edge of the orchard, Norah rinsed her hands in the creek and sat on the bank, watching the water tumble over stones. Yates sat nearby, whittling the end of a cedar stick. "I've been thinking," she said, pulling a strand of hair from her mouth. "About what comes next." He set the stick down. "What sort of next? I want to build the root cellar. We can do that. I want to raise goats, maybe chickens enough to sell eggs. Trade cheese for flour come fall." He nodded once. She looked at him then. "And I want to marry you." Yates didn't move at first, then he stood, brushed bark from his lap, and stepped in front of her. "I've wanted that," he said. "But I didn't want to speak at first in case you weren't ready." She stood, mud clinging to her hem. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." "I know." He took her hand, rough and warm, against hers. "There's a traveling preacher comes through Miles City every few months. He's due around Pentecost. That gives us time to sow something proper," she said, glancing toward the hills, "and bake enough bread to feed whoever shows up. I've got a bottle of whiskey tucked away," he added, "from the winter before last. I was saving it for something good." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "This is good." They stood there, hands joined, the wind stirring through the cottonwoods. Their wedding was small. A neighbor brought his wife and 2 sons, and the woman who ran the dry goods store came with a jar of blackberry preserves and sleeves rolled high to help cook. The preacher's voice carried across the yard, and Nora's dress, stitched from old muslin and trimmed with green thread, fluttered at the hem. Yates held her hand like it was something sacred. When she looked up at him, the lines around his mouth softened into something she hadn't seen before, a peace that had nothing to prove. That night, they sat on the porch while the last of the guests rode off down the trail. Norah leaned her head against his shoulder, her braid loose down her back. "Do you think it'll always be this quiet?" she asked. "Not always," he said, "but I think it'll always be ours." She laced her fingers with his and watched the stars slip forward across the sky. The years came warm and hard and full. The goats arrived in late spring, delivered by wagon from a trader passing through. Norah built a cheese press from scrap wood. Yates dug the root cellar, deeper than planned, and lined the walls with stone he hauled from the creek. They planted corn and cabbage, spun wool, traded honey for flour and seed. In the second year, Yates built a small smokehouse beside the garden, and Norah painted the front room with lime wash the color of river clay. They didn't speak often of what came before. Not because they forgot there were some things neither of them would ever forget, but because what they built now was rooted in the soil beneath their boots, not the shadows behind them. One autumn evening, as golden light spilled across the split-rail fence, Norah stood barefoot in the doorway, her hand resting low over the swell of her belly. Yates came in from the barn, brushing hay from his sleeves. She smiled at him, full and quiet. "He's kicking strong today." He crossed the room and laid a hand gentle over hers. "Just like his mama," he said. They stood together in the hush of early dusk, the stove ticking behind them, the world outside dimming into the first breath of night. They had come through fire and frost, through silence and soil. And now, wrapped in the hush of a home they had built with their hands and hearts, they stood side by side, steady as the land beneath them. Their life was not loud, but it was full, and it was theirs. Forever.